We've got some major news for the Champs and their franchise tag player, Chris Jones, defensive tackle who was so good for Kansas City in the playoffs last season, playing through injury. But Adam, let's get right to you. What can you tell us about the Chiefs and Chris Jones?
It's a 4-year, $80 million agreement, Field, that is worth up to $85 million. There's $37 million due at signing. You see the numbers there. $60 million in guaranteed money, a big deal for Chris Jones. Think about the Kansas City Chiefs over the last week. First, last week, they get a big 10-year extension done with Patrick Mahomes. Now they get a 4-year extension done with their franchise defensive tackle, Chris Jones. This is a player that was very important to Andy Reid and Brett Veach, the Chiefs general manager. They wanted to get the deal done to keep him in Kansas City, and I think they believe this transmits a message about the culture there, players wanting to be there, wanting to play for that coaching staff, wanting to be around Patrick Mahomes, and not having change. And I think if you're Chris Jones, when you see the lack of extensions done in the NFL and the fact that so few players are signing big money deals in part because of the pandemic, this is a chance to get $60 million in guaranteed money, 37 due at signing. You take that opportunity right away, and that's exactly what Chris Jones has done. He signed that big money deal that will keep him in Kansas City. And again, Mahomes deal and Chris Jones deal were mutually exclusive. They didn't have to get Mahomes done to get done Jones or get Jones done to get done Mahomes. It just so happens that they got their best offensive player and arguably their most impactful defensive player all done together, same time, 1 week apart, and there are the numbers on Chris Jones, Field.
23 and a half sacks. Lewis, when I hear 4 years and $85 million for Chris Jones, I think it's a lot of money. Is he worth it? And what do you make of this deal for Kansas City and Stone Cold Jones?
Yeah, I think all that matters is that the Kansas City Chiefs feel as though he's worth it, Field, and there's no question about that. Look, they were working on both of these deals at the same time. These were their priorities this offseason. Look, I mean, Brett wanted both of these guys in the fold. There was no question that Pat was always going to get done and that they were going to continue to work on Chris's deal. It was important for Chris to hit certain benchmarks in the contract. It was important for Brett Veach, that being the general manager, to make sure Chris felt well and felt taken care of and felt loved, and they obviously are showing him that. They have been very creative and very smart, very diligent as far as how they are structuring these contracts, especially in the short term, because they see that they have a very, very opportunistic window right now. They have a very young team, a team that really likes one another, a coach that has been reinvigorated in Coach Reid. They have two great coordinators. They have a young up-and-coming coordinator in Eric Bieniemy who's going to be a head coach soon. They have a quarterback coach in Mike Kafka who gets along very well with Pat Mahomes, who has also played a huge role in his development. Right now, this football team, given the trying circumstances that everyone is trying to navigate through, this football team is humming right along. And they are right now poised to make a heck of a run at putting some more Lombardis in their trophy case here as soon as we can get back on the field and start playing, because they are retaining their young players that have been instrumental in them getting over the hump. And this is something that many people didn't feel like they could do. As soon as they signed Pat Mahomes, they thought certain guys were going to be, sacrificed. And they may have to make some sacrifices, but they have a plan, and obviously that they are executing on it very well to this point.
Well, Lewis, you just mentioned the window, and you talked about them having a chance to run it back. I would presume you believe them to be the favorites in the Super Bowl or for the Super Bowl as things presently stand. How wide is the gap between them and the next closest competitor at this point?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one of those situations where they're like head and shoulders above everyone else, but their key components, Field, obviously are intact now. They have got their big-time playmakers. They got the people who are instrumental in scoring points, and they got a guy right now who is really charged with helping them stop points because Chris is a phenomenal pass rusher. And remember, they added Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who no one's really talking about, but could really make this offense lethal. Now, when you think about the rest of the contenders in the AFC, there's no doubt that Baltimore is going to be there. Baltimore is much better this year, even more so than they were last year. So they have got some great players. And in the NFC, there's some teams that have made some tremendous strides. Obviously, you got to keep your eye on Tampa. New Orleans is going to be there, and San Francisco is going to be right there. So the league is looking real good at the very top. And Kansas City knows that it cannot slip. They need to continue to keep their good players. And Chris Jones, obviously, as you look at that graphic on the screen, is one of the good players, and they're paying him like one.
And Lewis, what's interesting here is that Chris Jones is the first franchise player this week of the 14 who have been franchised to get a long-term deal done. There's a real good chance that he becomes the only one who gets a long-term deal done. Now, I still think the Dallas Cowboys may make another run at Dak Prescott, and we'll get into that. There are a number of other franchise players out there. We can talk about them. But the fact of the matter is, Chris Jones is the one franchise player this week that has gotten that deal done before the deadline. He may be the only one, and we are seeing across the league a lack of big money extensions. If you look at all the players who we thought might have extensions heading into the summer of 2020, we can go on and on with a list that includes Joey Bosa and Deshaun Watson and George Kittle and Jalen Ramsey and on and on and on. There have not been the number of big money extensions this offseason that you ordinarily would see. That is trickling down to this year's class of franchised players who are looking for long-term deals. And again, we come back to the pandemic and the times we're living in, the uncertainty surrounding where the cap is and where the cap is going, and why teams are being hesitant to commit big money to great players. But the Chiefs have overcome all that as the Super Bowl champions. In the last 2 weeks, they said, we're not worried about that. We're committing to Patrick Mahomes. We're committing to Chris Jones. And they've gotten 2 big deals with 2 big players done about 8 days apart.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.